Trump has touted his tariff policies as a way to pump, in his words, trillions of dollars into the U.S. economy and stimulate the U.S. economy. But if you read the reports, hear what critics have to say, it simply hasn't done that. The tariffs are simply an additional tax, costing Americans more money. Is that message resonating? And what about Trump's vow to continue pressing forward with his tariff policies?
Yeah, I think if you look at the numbers and you look what everyday Americans are complaining about, they still feel that spending is higher than it was before on the same basket of goods. They don't feel that the pain has been reduced. And the numbers suggest, there was about $1,000 tax increase for the average family in 2025, and that could go up to $1,300, in 2026.
So getting back to Trump vowing to press ahead with this, why is this message not resonating with the administration? Because the reports are out there, reporters ask him about it, but he just says, fake news, I'm 100% in with tariffs. So any chance we're going to see any change in the near future? I know the courts are considering things, but Trump seems married to this.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to wait till after midterms, to be honest, right? Because not much change can happen before then. I'm surprised they're going into the midterms with that kind of messaging, though, when the consumer is still feeling the pinch of inflation.
So let's talk about everyday goods. How are things being affected? Kind of break it down for us, these higher prices for everyday goods, because that was really the cornerstone of the Trump candidate. I'm going to bring down prices. We can blame Biden for where things are, but we have seen sharp increases over the past year.
Yeah, you've seen close to double-digit increases in household furniture. Clothing is close to 15%. So, food overall, especially if you look at the beef market, that's been heavily inflated. Coffee as well, because it has no substitutes. So there's been a lot of price pressure on the consumer. And, at the end of the day, it's a regressive tax on the consumer. So lower income families kind of feel it more challenging than higher net worth folks.
So let's talk about the way small businesses that have had to rely on imported components adjusted to these added expenses. Are they able, or are they forced to pass on these costs to consumers? Because we know some of the bigger stores and even car makers have tried to offset these punishing tariffs.
Yeah, they've tried to offset it. The smaller businesses have less ability to do so because the larger businesses could, hoard inventory, build large inventories in anticipation of the tariffs, where like smaller firms weren't able to do that. So they do have to face some additional pricing pressure, whether that's temporarily eating into margins. But, now we're seeing some of the bigger players, also cede on inflation too. Some of these video game systems have started to increase in price. And, 4 years into a video game cycle, you generally see those go down and not up.
Yeah, interesting. And what about examples out there of U.S. manufacturers benefiting from tariff protection, or are the higher costs basically offsetting those gains?
Yeah, there'll be pockets. Metals and miners in the U.S. Steel is probably going to be a beneficiary, but at what cost, right? I think there's going to be some pockets. There has been talk about slowing down inflation, even though this makes it pick up in one sense. It does weaken the consumer. You have seen some significant drawdown in savings rates, which have also affected various parts of the economy. You will see some companies decide to move business back to the U.S. I know Honda is moving some of the Civic hatchback facility in Indiana. But, those are one-off examples, where everyone kind of feels the pain of the tariff.
Yeah, and to get further into that, to move back is not only a big investment, it takes time. It's not like something we're going to see in the next year or two.
Yeah, right. And, some of these things you don't know if the demand will be there by the time this stuff is built. There's been stories in the last half a dozen years about some of these factories being promised and then never kind of come into fruition. So until the gates are opened, I'm always a little worried.
And this next question I think is really important and should not get lost, because there are growing concerns that our allies and former allies are finding new trading partners, many turning more and more to China, and some political leaders here in the U.S. are starting to notice, and as you mentioned, midterms are coming up, and they're concerned about it. China's exports have taken off, but their exports to the United States have dropped significantly. They're finding more and more and better trading partners.
Yeah, and sometimes it's an inefficient way to operate for the US because we'll end up buying this stuff anyway, but through some third party country that like puts the last screw in the bolt in the device, right? And that's also driving prices higher. You saw the kind of little bit of an uproar with the Canadian auto deal with China. So, I mean, that stuff is happening. And will that put pressure on US automakers? It certainly it's not going to help.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it's going to. What about the measurable impact on hiring, wages, investment, especially among small and mid-sized firms since these tariffs did take effect? Because if they're spending more money, we've heard so much about slow to hire, slow to fire, and it seems like this equation certainly isn't going to help that.
Yeah, and the smaller business has been weaker than the mega companies. Even they've showed signs of layoffs, and that's frankly going to be, an issue that continues to plague small business as well as hiring. We've seen hiring slow down similarly hand in hand. And maybe small businesses can adopt AI processes faster than large firms, allowing them to like save money and potentially hire less workers. Something else that's kind of reverberating through the economy. If you look at social media, they blame AI on every layoff. How much of that is true remains to be seen.